All right, guys. Hey, what's going on? I am back with another solo episode of What's My 100%. Um, I am excited to report that I do have some guests in the works, some friends of mine that I will be sitting down with coming up soon. So, yeah, gonna, if you hang with me and, hopefully it's. I'm laughing because I'm so grateful. So many of you gave me some feedback on the last episode and said that, the conversation felt resonant. And thank you for that. Because I think there's something about sitting talking to myself sometimes that I get a little bit like, oh, am I just speaking into the wind? And so I'm really grateful when you guys let me know that the conversation felt like it was a conversation between the two of us or, a group of us. It feels like fuel, and it kind of gives me that sense that I'm not just in here in my room recording solo. But there will be some friends coming on soon to join me in the conversation, which I'm excited about. And yeah, please keep the feedback coming. I was so grateful to hear from many of you on that last episode. And I'm still working through some of the questions that you submitted. Some of you submitted a few weeks ago, letting me know just some things that you would be hungry to talk about. And it's interesting. I was sort of sifting through a few of the topics, and it's not surprising to me actually that there were a few questions about infidelity, about cheating, about being the other woman in a relationship dynamic. And I thought, because as someone who works and has worked primarily with couples for several years, infidelity is something that comes up quite frequently as sort of the presenting issue that a couple will come in with to want to work on. And so I was thinking about it. I was like, yeah, actually, I don't think, certainly on What's My 100%, we've ever talked much about cheating, infidelity. And there was a really thoughtful question that was sent to me in my direct messages that I thought I would just read, and hopefully in the conversation we'll touch on several of the touch points that came up with some of the other questions that people were asking about infidelity. So I'm going to read the question, jotted it down so we can get into it. And this person said, Dene, I am hoping you might be open to sharing your thoughts on infidelity in an upcoming episode of the podcast. Your book, Sovereign Love, resonated deeply with me, and I agree with so much of what you were saying about ownership and ownership templates in relationships. But I recently found out that my husband had an affair, and I'm spiraling. I'm attempting to identify what is true and what is not, attempting to reconcile the love I still feel for this man alongside the betrayal and sense that maybe I do not know this person at all. Big breath. Yeah, even as I read that back again, my heart is with you and feeling just the level of deep destabilization that happens no matter what, when there is a truth and some things that I have come to understand and believe about my life and my relationship up to this point. And I think an affair is one of those things that just rocks that foundational core of belief structures in a way that is so deeply destabilizing. And so I just want to say, before we even get into the question or the conversation, the extent to which I'm just holding you in my heart, and hope you are doing so much, whoever wrote in with this question, to just take care of yourself well, hopefully not navigating these waters solo. And that you're sort of surrounding yourself with some community, hopefully some therapy or, coach, someone to support you as you're processing all that's coming up, and just doing what you need to do to nurture yourself really well. I think when we're in the midst of one of these just like cataclysmic shifts in the world as I've known it, moments, it just becomes really important to do all of the extra things to take care of ourselves well, right? And that can mean like binging on my favorite comfort movies and comfort food, and getting massages, like whatever you need to do to, like, I'm starting with like your physical sense of taking care of yourself. I really want to encourage you, even if it feels sort of indulgent or irresponsible, like to actually give yourself permission to do the things that in your toolkit, or like these are the things that inevitably make me feel better, to really drop into those spaces right now. Yeah. So, so many big points of consideration whenever we have discovered that the person that I've been in a relationship with has had some pretty significant secrets. And there's just so much around infidelity that brings up challenges around our core beliefs around right and wrong and the agreements we've made and trust and what I can trust in. It's so complex, right? And it's so interesting, you guys, because I wrote this book. Those of you who have never heard of the book that I wrote, Sovereign Love, that the person who asked this question is referencing. And I talk a lot in my book around the challenge with ownership templates. And you sort of referenced that in your question, and that this idea that we belong to one another once we come into partnership or marriage, or even sometimes when we're in a long-term relationship dynamic, how that can sort of lead to levels of complacency and maybe some entitlement in our relationship dynamics, and just things that I see come up with couples a lot of times when we believe that someone belongs to us that really aren't loving one another in a present-centered consciousness, right? And so because I wrote that, I find that so often people will really feel like I am making strong statements about non-monogamy or polyamorous dynamics, or even, that I am sort of, I don't want to say like excusing infidelity. God, I'm certainly not. and, it's interesting. Even as I say that, and I'm sort of laughing as I say it, I am always, and whenever I sit with a couple, I like to take sort of the villain victim narrative off the table, because I actually don't think it's as supportive of us getting to the space of how we want to hold this and what is actually the truth of what alignment could look like and how we got here. And I find that tends to be where I hold some of these dynamics around infidelity in a little bit of a different perspective than some of the more common frameworks that you will hear people talking about it in terms of relational therapy, meaning that one person is the victim of this horrific thing, and that other person needs to be in the space of attempting to reconcile the way that they have been the perpetrator of harm. Now, so much complexity, even as I say that, because it's not that is not necessarily rooted in some aspects of truth, that, whenever we are out of integrity and we are lying and we are not, there's certainly like that old 12-step moniker, like we're only as sick as our secrets, right? So I would argue that those secrets and that lack of integrity is harmful on some level for all parties involved. And so I really am more interested in us getting to the truth of how we got here than I am making one person right, one person wrong, one person needing to be in the space of apologizing and making this better. And here's why. I find that so often what we will do not what we will do, what more historic constructs of couples therapy will do in terms of repair is to sort of like, we rebuild trust by me having access to all of your stuff, you being, an open book and answering all of my questions, and me being in the space of, as long as I need to process this in whatever way I need to create repair, that's something you need to be responsible for doing. And I would say perhaps, and that might be something that is supportive, but might be ways that we need to dig a little bit deeper. And I would say both people need to dig a little deeper. And this is the like big breath as I say this, challenging aspect of how I ask both people in a couple to hold this, that whenever there is something that has created this type of a rupture, like infidelity, it is a dance between both of us. It is a way that somewhere, and this can be like, the tricky ways that we have self-abandoned or, gone along to get along or cared more about how we are falling into societal constructs of what a quote happy functioning marriage is, and normal versus in the space of like vigorously honest conversations with one another and how we have normalized that or how we have, just it can be so subtle. And I could go through the different ways of unpacking what that could conceivably look like, and we can. But to me, it's more about like each person doing their own inventory of like, what did I not want to see, right? Like what, in terms of my blind spots, were there also ways that I, just didn't see aspects of our dynamic that maybe life is supporting me in looking at now. And it's not even just our dynamic, but like my dynamic in relationships. And that can be the way that I have just minimized some of the things that are crucial for me and ways that I want to show up in relating that, maybe because of society's templates of who I was supposed to be, quote, for example, a good wife, I didn't show up that way. And life is inviting me back into that space of vigorous honesty, right? And so all of that is me saying, as much as people sort of think my book was some sort of statement about like how I feel like monogamy is not truth, that's actually not true. I'm like an incredibly monogamous person, and that's me, and everybody should do whatever is in alignment with their truth. I am more in my book and in my life and in whatever statements I'm making. I am more, I think, making statements about how we live in alignment with truth and how we see life as supporting us in coming into alignment with deeper layers of truth and authenticity. And that this life, these relationships are a co-creation with our own divinity and with our soul's path. And I think so often if we're talking about it in the context of marriage, these marital constructs and templates have really not been supportive of us living the most vigorously honest lives we possibly can with becoming who we have the potential to be. They've sort of been rooted in the prioritization of keeping structures intact, quite often patriarchal structures intact. And when I say that, I'm not talking about men or masculinity. I always want to give that caveat. I'm talking about structures that were rooted in dominance and structures that were rooted in, just a specific external blueprint of what truth and belonging would require, right? And so I love to, whenever I'm sitting with a couple and there has been infidelity, I love to sort of look at it as like, this is an initiation, a process of initiation that life is ushering you both into. And whether you were the initiator because you had an affair, or whether this is the thing that you have just discovered is true in your life, there is like me on the one side of discovering this infidelity, and then me and who I will become on the other side of this initiatory process. And we are alchemized in the fire of that discomfort and in that deep sort of reckoning we have with where we get to like source a sense of safety and truth, and where we don't get to do that ever again, right? And it's really tough because this other person, I've thought a lot about why we put such emphasis on the attachment and why that becomes the thing that, whoever we are, I don't care what we've accomplished. I don't care about our expertise in whatever area. Our relationship dynamics are sort of the things that can bring anyone to their knees. I can't tell you the extent to which I've worked with people just in all facets of life and in different career paths and with different levels of what this societal construct might describe as, quote, success. And the relationships are always the thing that it's like, I don't care who you are. We're all just doing the best we can, and we will inevitably be activated in these relationship dynamics, right? And be confronted with our core wounding in these dynamics, right? I think that's why I find this relational work so fascinating. And I think there's a way that what we have been sold and what we still attempt to buy into and believe within ourselves is that, you know, I talk a lot about like these two human needs that we have. And, you know, I reference Gabor Mate's work a lot when talking about this, but there are a lot of people that describe these dualities that exist within us and this need that we have for attachment as a fundamental human need, and this need that we have for authenticity, but that attachment will always trump authenticity in the beginning because it's a survival need. And, you know, children come into this life needing something to be anchored in, something to be tethered to. And so they need attachment with a caregiver and with something that they can feel like I am tethered to a sense of, I would say, you know, it might be the striving for belonging, but a lot of times it's fitting in. It's sort of falling into patterns of who I need to be in order to make mommy, daddy love me. And that becomes what I often describe as the first blueprints of our codependent tendencies are formed as we're attempting to maintain attachments to our original caregivers, right? And so we learn all of these ways that we need to diminish our authentic selves, right? I have big, authentic, inconvenient emotions as a child, and my parent or caregiver says, you know, go to your room and don't come back until you can be a reasonable person and, you know, get yourself together, right? And so I get a very specific imprint within me that in order to belong, in order to receive love from this parent or caregiver, which I know that I need for survival on a very sort of primal, instinctual level, I know that I need them for survival. So I will do whatever I need to do to mold myself into something that is more palatable. But is that the word that I'm looking for? Something that is more digestible to this parent, caregiver, whoever it is, in order to maintain that attachment, right? And so this is something that doesn't just sort of stop once we become an adult. I would say it becomes a survival strategy that actually expands even more. And so what ends up happening is as we're dating people, as we are attempting to cultivate a sense of love and belonging, we get really good at it. We get really good at allowing you to see the parts of me that I know you will believe are the parts that are what I believe are worthy of love. But I can sort of sense, and all of us have this intuitive ability to sense what are the parts of us that another person or other people find intolerable. And I will minimize those parts of myself, not necessarily even consciously sometimes, but I will minimize those things about myself that I know will either cultivate a sense of fear or a sense of disdain within you. I will make those parts smaller so that you will want to stay close to me, right? And I can do that for a while, but it's not really a survival or sustainable. It's not really a sustainable strategy because, as I was saying before, we have these two needs. One is that attachment, that survival need, but we also need to become an authentic self. And I talk about this in so many ways in terms of these dualities. And that can be sort of like the avoidant, anxious, energetic, the stability versus aliveness, the masculine, the feminine. There's all of these ways that we can talk about how that shows up. But ultimately what we are speaking to is the fact that at some point, the part of me that needs to continue to be alive and becoming and challenging the structures of stability as I've known them, suppressing that part of me in order to maintain an attachment is not a sustainable thing. So at some point, I will be triggered, activated. Life will present me with something that reminds me of where I have not been showing up authentically, right? Where I am not in alignment with the truth that is a lot of times the existential truth that my time in this body is limited and that we came here to live fully, not to keep ourselves as safe as possible in these structures, whether that's a marital structure or a job that, provides a sense of safety, whatever that is, that we came here to live and often to challenge ourselves into the spaces that make us uncomfortable, to cultivate that sense of eros and life force and, dare I say, danger, right? And because our society is a societal structure that holds so much contempt for what is the unknowable, the uncertainty, the feminine, the soul space, the meaning, we don't hold those as values. We sort of hold like the structure, the stability, the marital status, the certainty that I can formulate. We hold that as like the valuable thing that we should attempt to focus on. And so when we only focus on the stability, the structure, we are out of balance. And the thing about our souls is that our soul will fight to come back into a more balanced way of being. And life will, this is a Peter Crone quote that I love so much and reference often, where he says, life will present you with people and circumstances to demonstrate where you are not free. And I think the reason I love that so much is just there's this understanding that all of the occurrences in our life, whether it is the relationship dynamic that I am presented with, that shows me where I had put slid all of my chips over into the stability and the structural category and not really put a lot of stock in my aliveness and in my becoming and in my individuation process, as, we might describe it in Jungian psychology. Life will show me where I am out of balance or where I am not the fullest, most embodied, free version of myself, and attempt to support us in coming back to that sense of wholeness. And all that I'm saying in the midst of the confrontation with, the structure that I had held to be true up to this point, being challenged, is that sometimes really challenging to hear. And, you can't throw something at me, but I would understand if you want to, right? But I think what I really attempt to do in these moments of destabilization is infuse a curiosity around the soul's curriculum into the conversation. Meaning, I don't care who you are in the context of this type of dynamic, whether you are the person that your partner was having an affair with, whether you are the partner that was actively involved in the affair, or whether you are the person who has just come to the realization that the person that I've been in a relationship with, believing that we were one thing to one another, that is not the case as I understood it, right? I would ask any of you, all of you, any of you that I was speaking to get so very curious about how is life attempting to support me in coming back into a deeper space of truth and liberation, and how can I be open to that as what this has come to teach me. And it's such a big ask of ourselves, right? Because it is that space of uncertainty that life is asking us to come into right relationship with, right? Like, where have I believed that I got to know that anything that is true right now would always be the case? And the really difficult truth, my loves, is that that is never the case. No part of this life is ever promised to any of us. We are here for a little while. We get to experience whatever life decides is going to be the truth of our experience for whatever point of time or amount of time that is true. But I think sometimes what some of these puritanical, maybe patriarchal structures have sold us the lie around and about is that if you're just a good person and you just follow the rules, whatever those rules are, then you will be sort of free from uncertainty or discomfort. And I would say not only is that not at all the case, but that's not actually what we came into this skin to experience. And I think if we think about like what our lives would be if we just knew that everything was going to be certain and we were going to just like, get up, go to work, live the same day, day after day, it would be actually a lot more destabilizing to our psyche than we realize, because again, there's a part of us that came here for expansion and for growth. And a lot of times what I find is when we are experiencing some of the things that in Western psychology we might describe as mental health struggles, the depression, anxiety, and things of that nature, what it is really about is where we've put so much stock and belief in the stability and not really the understanding that we are meant to be in this constant state of becoming and expansion and really a more self-actualized version of who we've been. And so all of these challenging moments become the really sacred invitation into that space if we're willing to see it that way. Big breath. And, even as I say that, I want to hold so tenderly that I'm saying all of this in the midst of what just feels so unbelievably painful. And I know that, and I want to name some of why we have to challenge some of the societal constructs that make it so painful. We are really taught to believe, and, we're holding several things at the same time, and we have to, that there's a very human innate desire within all of us that we want to feel like we are special, and love is the promise that I will be special to you. Certainly, these romantic constructs or contracts maybe offer that alleviation from the idea that I'm not special. We are special. And it's that thing in A Course in Miracles that all of the children of the universe are special and none of the children of the universe are special. And we are special, absolutely. And in that specialness, it does not mean that the person that we are relating to will be an omnipresent, all-knowing, fearless, godlike figure. Yes, we are relating to other humans who have their own pain points and their own fears and their own ways of navigating all of the existential challenges that come up for all of us in this human experience. And I think one of the things that I've really come to understand and think about a lot when it comes to relating is the extent to which we have just put on another human being such an impossible expectation of really being the higher power that we used to seek in all of these other spaces. We used to seek it in community. We used to seek it in, our religious institutions or our spiritual practices. And so often in society now, we seek all of that in this one other human being. It's too much for one person to ever be or carry for us. And when we put that expectation on another person, I believe that life will sort of, not consciously, but will instruct them or, guide them in the direction of alleviating us of that distortion. So they will be guided to disappoint us, I guess is what I'm saying, so that we understand that that level of power was never for another human being to hold. Yeah. No other person was ever meant to be our salvation or our higher power. And I think in the context of our relationship dynamics, some of this soul work and some of this soul's curriculum, if it has not been infused in our dynamic, these type of ruptures like infidelity become the opportunity to infuse that back into the conversation, the connection between us, right? And so when I work with couples who are sort of grappling in this space, a lot of times some of what that looks like is, what do you think this is in terms of your heroine's journey, your hero's journey, in terms of the dragon that you are being asked to slay to move on to the next step of your becoming a little bit wiser through what you've just conquered? And that's for both people to understand. Where have I been outsourcing a sense of safety? Where have I been outsourcing a sense of validation? Where have I been kicking the can down the road on some of the core wounding that I've been a little bit hesitant to look at? And how is this relationship dynamic attempting to show me that I don't get to put that level of outsourcing of my power into another person's hands. They were never meant to carry that for us, right? And so, yeah, I think a lot of times, people will sort of hear me as saying that I don't think infidelity is wrong or immoral, and I don't actually genuinely have an opinion either way. I think we're humans, and I think humans are fallible. And while I have never personally I love to sort of attempt to empathize with whatever the thing is that any client that I'm working with might be going through. And while I've never been on the side of like the quote perpetrator of cheating, I've never cheated on someone, I've certainly been on the receiving end of that type of a dynamic. And I would say there were times, in the last episode, I was talking about how much I used to get stoned all the time. And I think there's a lot about that dynamic of having a drug of choice that I was really in an intimate relationship with, that as I'm talking to people about their experience of what it felt like to be in the affair and in the infidelity, I would sort of understand. I would sort of empathize with what they were describing. And I'm saying that to say, I think the most crucial place that we can be, and this is the really, really difficult place for us to ask ourselves to come into. And really, I'm asking myself to like pull up my big girl, big boy pants and do the really difficult work of putting down some of the societal narratives around like what this means from the space of like my ego's constructs of like why I wasn't enough for you, or why this means that you didn't respect me or love me. I would say in my experience of affairs, infidelity, that it is very rarely the case that that dynamic has as much to do with our primary partnership as we would like to think it does. Sometimes it does, but the difficult truth is a lot of times it has to do with some of my own fears and existential reckoning, and ways that I felt seen and validated in some of my core wounding that I hadn't looked at or hadn't addressed. And it's really about like my relationship with myself. And again, that can be really hard to hear and digest in the midst of me sitting in such a difficult space with this. But if I can attempt to be curious, and I often do use, if your partner were an alcoholic and had made the promise to not drink and you found out they were drinking, would you be able, do you think, to be curious about what you feel when you're getting drunk, what you feel that sort of alleviates you from the difficulty or the suffering that you were experiencing, or what you felt that you have longed to feel? Just like really curious about their process and what they were getting from it, right? Because we don't do anything in life without a payoff. And that's important, right? So whatever the thing is, I'm getting some payoff from it. If I can be curious about the payoff for my partner versus the details of what went down and, how they felt about that person, like to me, those things are less supportive of all people involved in the process than really the curiosity around like, what did you feel that you have been longing to feel, right? And I think that to me is me sort of speaking to you saying, I'm attempting to reconcile the love I still feel with the betrayal. And that's that part of us that just really longs to understand like how you could do this, how this could happen, and that I still feel a lot of love for you. But I just am really hurt by the fact that I don't understand how you could do this. And that person may not have an answer, and they may have to do some of that inventory for themselves. And I just want to name that. But I think that that can be a place that we can, start exploring in terms of like being in the curiosity. Again, big breath. So I just want to name that when I work with a couple and we are working through infidelity, it is such a process of unearthing some of our core wounding, our limiting beliefs about ourselves and about relationships. It's such a process of coming back home to the trust that I have to be in my own internal space, and where I have to like really be in the space of staying with me no matter what. And I would say that to both people, because whether this person decides to stay, if if you are the person that cheated and like you are attempting to quote fix or create some sort of repair in your relationship dynamic, whether that person is able to stay in this dynamic with you or not, I think it becomes really important that we still believe that we are worthy of redemption and worthy of understanding that this is a chapter in my story and not the whole book, and that I have to be in the belief that I am, the only me that I've got. So I've got to still believe in myself and trust that I am more than the thing that I've done. That doesn't sort of color who and what I am. And if I am the person on the other side who is just finding out about this infidelity, really being in the space of understanding that I'm always held, no matter what, even in the midst of feeling like the human being that I thought I could believe in and depend on, having disappointed me in ways that I'm really struggling to reconcile. And, I hear that in your question, and that is sometimes life's sacred invitation into a deeper, intimate relationship with something larger than a human being, right? For me, that would be like my higher power, source, whatever that is, but it might be something different for you. And you kind of have to identify that for yourself. But I would say it becomes an invitation back into the sacred and into my own spiritual work. And again, I'm sort of referencing it from the way that I hold these things, and that either resonates for you or it doesn't. But that's sort of the way that I know how to approach these moments. And that nothing is ever wasted, right? So to me, a lot of times in terms of whether we are meant to stay together, journeying side by side with one another, it becomes less of the relevant point to me now. I know even as I say that, sometimes there are variables, children, lives, finances, homes, all of these things that play a part in that. And I'm not minimizing that, but I really like to look at relationship dynamics through a little bit of a different lens, and in terms of our soul work and what our souls are asking of us in terms of how we are meant to grow, but also how we are meant to rise into the highest iteration of who we have the potential to become. And if you love someone, really doing that on behalf of the love that I feel for this person, and asking myself with that vigorously honest inquiry, do I feel like I am able to show up in alignment with the integrity of who I want to be in this relational container? And that might not be a question that you can answer immediately. That might be a process, but really attempting to be in that consideration, right? I think I often say that I believe relationships need 3 components in order to thrive, and they are inspiration, respect, and a shared vision. And I think a lot of times when we are in these spaces of attempting to create repair after these type of ruptures, and that can be the infidelity, but it can also be some of the processing we're doing around all of these relational dynamics in terms of the ownership templates and, the ways that we are all, and not necessarily in a bad way at all, but just like exploring these dynamics around how we hold relating and opening our relationship dynamics and ethical non-monogamy and polyamory, all of the things, right? But I think ultimately the inventory we have to do for ourselves is, 1, do I truly respect myself and this other person in the container of the way that we are relating to one another? And if I don't respect the way you're showing up, if I, and I see this a lot, and I think it's one of those challenging things to speak to, if I am really honest with myself, if I believe that this affair or this energy of, whoever you are in a relationship with, is really about you sort of outsourcing a sense of external validation in a way that makes it really difficult for me to respect. One, I gotta be a little bit honest about that so we can do some processing around that. But two, I gotta be honest with myself then about how much of me wanting to stay in this relationship dynamic is more about the attachment to the relationship than it is about my love and respect and admiration of you. Because I think that can really challenge two of those fundamental components, the inspiration and respect, that I just see without that. It can be really challenging for relationships to be in alignment with truth. And the other thing that I think I tend to hold a little bit of a different perspective than so many of the relational, constructs of relational therapy or counseling psychology or whatever it is, right? Is that I actually don't think that space from a relationship dynamic is a bad thing. Meaning, I think that sometimes clarity can be really difficult to come to up close and personal. And listen, I understand that not everybody has the means and the ability to separate from one another. But sometimes if it is something that is accessible, and that can be as simple as like sleeping on your brother's couch for a while, if he will let you do that. And again, I'm saying all these variables as like things that need to be worked out when there are other points of consideration, children, responsibilities, all of those things. Obviously, when I work with couples, we talk about all of those variables. And so I'm not ignorant to those things, I guess is what I'm saying. And I think that sometimes in the space of, we just got to keep this container intact at all costs, we're sort of doing more of kicking that can down the road and not really being in the felt, visceral, somatic experience of what does it feel like to be with and by myself while I attempt to get clear around how did I get here in whatever side of the dynamic I'm on. I think I speak often about the fact that we are just a society that does not value spiritual solitude and spiritual inquiry in the way that I think is really detrimental to us on a soul level. And when we're in one of these cataclysmic upsets, like infidelity inevitably creates, I think just a little bit of space to breathe and get clear for all parties involved, if it's something that is possible. I can't say enough how much I have seen that actually can create a lot of clarity, but also an opportunity to construct something very new and very different, and maybe more in alignment with truth and forward momentum in a way that can be supportive of what we want to create, right? So yeah, I said a lot, but the question's important, and it feels really difficult to touch on all of the intricacies and depth of what is required in terms of holding this conversation tenderly. And so I hope you will give me grace around that, but I hope you will give yourself just so much grace and support to the extent that you were able. And that can be getting in some places where you're in community and really allowing yourself to be seen by your loved ones in your circle and all of the things. And I'm just thinking of you and just sending you so much love. And yeah, I'm grateful that you have read Sovereign Love and you are thinking about yourself on a soul level as you're navigating these deep waters that you're swimming in. Yeah. It's so funny, you guys. I mean, it never is really, but I pulled a card right before I sat down, knowing that was the question I was going to dive into. And I pulled a card from this deck that I just love, the Sufi Tarot. It's such a just potent deck, but the card I pulled, I feel like is one of those cards that you see it and you're like, ugh. But it's also I think, sort of appropriate for this conversation. So I pulled the Eight of Swords. And as we know, I only read uprights. So the Eight of Swords, I'm going to read, it says, feeling trapped, helpless, losing hope, caught in recurring patterns, stuck in a self-created mental prison, which anyone who's ever swam in these deep waters that we're talking about can understand why this card would feel appropriate for that energy. The Eight of Swords is about feeling hopeless and bound when one is not. Yes, the woman in our card stands behind what seems like bars, but is that truly what they are? If there is a way out, she is certainly not looking for it. The blindfold she wears represents her disinterest in looking for ways to leave. Her mental state is her cage. Whether by repeated patterns and cycles in our lives or by outside conditions, there is complacency and fatalism that can creep in our minds and keep us trapped. The underlying emotion in many cases of this state of paralysis is fear. Fear of being alone, of being abandoned, and of failure. Oof. When this card appears for you, you are being encouraged to examine your relationship with what Sufis call the nafs al-lawama, your hesitant, self-questioning self. This is the part of you that puts yourself and your needs last and is overly deferential and a harsh judge of both yourself and others. Ooh. It is this state of being that makes us feel powerless and blindly accept what we were taught, finding comfort in non-action. Is there something in the past that keeps you so trapped that the way out is no longer visible? The contemplations of this card are, am I physically stuck somewhere, or is it an inner state? What fears keep me from breaking free? And the affirmation is, I am free from the patterns of the past. Oof, I just love that this card came out for this conversation. You know, I think if we are willing to believe that we are always held, no matter what, then every single occurrence of our life is supporting us in becoming a little bit more in alignment with the truth of our essence and a little bit more free. And I do believe that we came into these bodies to remember just the extent to which we are always free and we are the divine in human form expressing itself, but that is a space of liberation and free expression, and that anything that I believe I need in order to be whole is always out of alignment with that truth of our essence. And so life will orchestrate a series of circumstances to support us in coming back into that truth. And so just loving you and holding you in my heart as I say that. And I want to share that I decided to do an online, I think I was speaking to this last time, but an online intensive for 8 weeks for couples. It's something that has come up several times, and I'm calling it Sovereign, the couples intensive. I've had a few people sign up already, so I'm very excited, but we're going to get started April 14th for 8 weeks on Tuesdays. And if you are in a partnership, where you are struggling with some of the themes that we talked about in this last hour, maybe if you know someone who's struggling with these types of relationship dynamics, maybe share this episode or the information on this intensive with them. I tried to make it accessible in a way that, when I work with couples, it might not be as accessible for everyone, obviously, because I'm one person, but really getting into a lot of the dynamics in the work that I do with couples, attempting to find certainly more fulfillment in our relationship dynamics, but relationships that support us in our soul's liberation and in feeling a little bit more free. And that would be my wish for all of you. So that is starting April 14th. But before then, on March 19th, I am also going to do a free workshop called Embodying the Love You Want. And if you want to come by and see me for that, I would love to hang out with you. I would love to talk about just some of these themes around love and relating, and how that is evolving and how we are taking so much responsibility for how our souls are being supported in our collective evolution and who we are meant to become through how we are relating to one another. So that is going to be March 19th from 4 to 5:30 p.m. Pacific. Link is in my Instagram bio, and I'll put a link in the show notes for both of those to sign up if you're interested. But just thank you for spending this time with me. I truly do not take it for granted one bit. Grateful to be able to connect with you all in this way. And please keep questions, thoughts, connection points coming. It feels really clarifying and helpful to me to be able to talk a little bit longer, to hear what's alive for you guys and how I can be supportive. So thanks again for being here. Take good care of yourselves, and I will see you again soon.